Hello, welcome to Talking Tropes.
Where we whisk you away to a tropical island.
I'm Hannah.
And I'm David.
And we're here to talk to you about all of the tropes and rating cliches that you find on television that you love to love and sometimes love to hate.
That's right. And today I'm just going to start us off with a quote from great writer, director, and actor Orson Welles, who said, "The enemy of art is the absence of limitations." So what does that mean, Hannah?
Well, English professor David, basically it's sometimes that limitation can actually enhance your art in some ways.
Right.
That being able to do anything can sometimes lead to creative stifling in certain ways. And I think a really cogent example of that is the Star Wars prequels versus the original Star Wars movies.
Sure, if you don't have anybody to sort of rein in your basest instincts, sometimes you just kind of go nuts.
Right, and I mean, especially that first movie, a lot of it was done really cheaply.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, they did not have a big budget, but it came out great because they really worked, like, people had the passion.
Right, I mean,
So we're not talking about Star Wars
We're not talking about
today.
Star Wars at all. In fact, we're going to be talking a lot about Star Trek because today we're talking about bottle episodes, the lowest budget episodes of our favorite TV shows.
Yes, so TV Tropes, which is a wonderful website that you should all check out.
Where we plagiarize regularly.
Yeah, we're not sponsored by them, but they're just a great resource. They define a bottle episode as an episode that's designed to take up as little money as possible, and usually the way that showrunners and producers decide to go about this is they use either only the regular cast or sometimes even only a portion of the regular cast, and it's usually set in a single location.
And sometimes that's like the set that they use for every single episode, so they don't have to go around like, scouting locations or building new sets or designing new costumes or...
Exactly.
When we're talking about Star Trek, who were the trope namer for this particular trope, like you didn't have to design any new aliens. With Star Trek, originally they would call these episodes ship-in-a-bottle shows, which got shortened to bottle shows, and then over time became bottle episodes. And these were episodes that took place almost entirely on the ship.
Right. And they usually happened after really big, expensive set piece type of episodes that would come before. And one thing about them is that usually, since they didn't have some sort of big outside monster threat or they didn't have a lot of other characters to bounce off of, it became very much contained and very much needed to be about
the interpersonal relationships of the crew,
right, or
a very internal moral dilemma.
Right. So there's a couple of episodes from Star Trek. We've been watching a lot of bottle episodes just for you, just for this.
Oh yeah, so many. A lot of variety in this one.
It's been pretty great. And it's also been pretty interesting. I think I've come across a lot of really different types of bottle episodes.
For sure. I think we could at the end maybe we'll come up with some good categories or sub-tropes to look out for in these.
Yeah.
But let's start with the first ever, official bottle episode as determined by the crew.
Ship in a bottle.
Which is Season 1, Episode 5 of Star Trek, The Naked Time, which is... The fact that could be a title for an episode just really shows this is from the 60s. This is not a... No one would call an episode The Naked Time today.
I don't know. I feel like there are for sure shows that would.
Right, but it'd be a little more tongue-in-cheek. Not so sincere.
I guess.
So this episode is pretty famous because it's the one where Sulu goes crazy and runs around with a sword.
I have to say, George Takei was a cutie.
Oh,
dang.
Yeah. I mean...
He was ripped.
He's like a pirate on a spaceship, and he's just having a time swinging a sword around. It's good for everybody.
So the idea is that the crew becomes infected with this virus, which is transferred via sweat.
The crew gets drunk. They literally refer to it as being that this chemical makes people behave the way that they do when they drink alcohol.
Right. So I think some of the ways that people acted was like maybe not so drunk. I don't know.
I don't know. Okay, let's go through one by one. All right, here's what happens to everybody.
No, I don't think we have to.
I think we should, though, because I think it's really interesting.
Okay.
A couple of the crew people get really rapey. There's,
Sulu becomes a really fun pirate.
I honestly think that if George Takei got drunk, he might teach us what being a pirate is like, and that's...
Okay.
That's just true in my mind, in my...
very, very possible.
And then Spock just like starts crying.
Spock has an emotion.
He has an emotion, and it's like the first time that we really talk about how like Vulcan culture suppresses emotions, but half humans have emotions. It's very interesting, and like Kirk and Spock basically just have this like nice like drunk slap fight while they cry about being sad while their ship is about to explode.
Right. So that's one thing that I think I'm going to say this sets, I think, some pretty good precedents for other bottle episodes that we're going to see.
Sure.
One big one that I found watching through a lot of these is that lockdown due to some sort of contamination is like a big one. Not just in sci-fi, like in other dramas and comedies, like for whatever reason, like lockdown because there's a contaminant out and now these people just all have to deal with each other has been like a really good external excuse.
Well, because like the biggest thing in most of these episodes, you have to have an external excuse because like for the most part we don't want to be in enclosed spaces with like a few people. Like we don't like being trapped.
Right, or feeling trapped.
Right. So you have to come up with like an external reason why these people can't leave, and it can't be because we don't have the budget to shoot outside.
Right. Right. So I think it sets up that. I think in this one there's minimal, I'm going to say, bouncing off of characters. Like the characters do interact and they do have to deal with each other.
It's a lot of like one character in a room on the ship just being drunk by themselves.
Right. Or like one character being outrageous and the rest of the characters having to sort of deal with that. Right. And another thing that I think this episode does that I think several other bottle episodes did is that their characters have to solve a problem like against a ticking clock. Like they have to solve the problem. They have to deal with each other quickly and in this manner because there's again some sort of external pressure. So I think this one is very much an external bottle episode and is much less about the interpersonal stuff.
Sure.
Though I think we get
it's not interpersonal, but it is inner with each character. I mean, we do sort of. It's about like seeing the emotions that we repress because they're in this military setting.
I think there's a really nice moment between, I think it was this episode, between Kirk and Uhura, and then I think also a really nice moment between Kirk and Spock.
Yes, absolutely. And then there's a really nice moment between Kirk and his ship where he says he wants to fuck his ship.
Does he?
That was pretty intimate. He starts like rubbing himself on the walls of the ship, going like, "Oh, I see why they call you a she. What an amazing ship you are."
Okay, well, who knew?
I want to fuck this ship.
I definitely missed that. So later in that this is all season 1 original gen stuff. The next one happens in episode 15. That was episode 5 in the episode The Balance of Terror.
I mean, this is just like a classic, like when you think about what is Star Trek, you think like, oh, it's the crew sitting on the bridge and they're planning a space attack against another ship that has like confusing technology or something.
So this one was interesting for me, and I questioned the bottliness of it. And I questioned the bottliness of the Naked Time as well, because while it did all take place on the Enterprise for the most part, it still took place on a lot of different places in the Enterprise.
Okay, but like you have to think, you know, in the way that we're going to be defining this, we're not talking about locked in a room episodes. We're talking about ship in a bottle episodes, and this is absolutely that. All of those sets they had from previous episodes, and they would continue to use for the rest of the show. Like these are not new sets. And then for Balance of Terror, like the Romulan Warbirds, which are the primary thread of the episode, like they are also used again and again in the series. And the costumes for the Romulans were just Vulcan costumes that were repurposed. The point of the episode was definitely to save money. And I think that is going to be crucial in defining what is and isn't a bottle episode.
Sure, right. Yeah, I would say that. But it definitely does jump between the two ships a lot. Like, I feel like there were two separate bottle episodes going on almost, where we have the Romulan side of it.
But I think that's pretty common in a lot of the ones that we're going to cover too, is that they'll have maybe two sets, but they're just sets that they already own.
Do they already own the Romulan set?
Maybe they didn't, but they definitely used it again.
Sure.
You know, this, like, it was definitely a pretty cheap set that they knew that they were going to use again because they knew that the Romulans were going to be a consistent threat because they're at war with the Federation.
So for me, this one, I felt like the main conflict that went on was really between the two captains. Like, there were some other things that happened, but it really felt, at least for me, like it was very much the two captains were matching wits and battling, and then like the way that they responded to one another's actions is what gave us insight into those characters themselves.
Yeah, it's a chess game, which Star Trek loves its chess games. I think that also, like, when I'm thinking about how Gene Roddenberry conceives an episode, like, and his big themes that he loves, is he loves talking about racism, and that was definitely a heavy theme in this episode because Spock looks like a Romulan, and one of the crew members is very, like, judgmental of him. Is like, well, why don't you just, you would know what the Romulans would be like because you look like them. I mean, like, I think that's really the conflict that Gene Roddenberry at least would see as the main conflict, not necessarily like the shooting between the two ships.
Absolutely, sure. So then there's a couple more Star Trek episodes that sort of fall into this bottle episode.
Right. Well, now we're getting into new versions of Star Trek, right?
Right.
We're going to be talking about Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager. Every Star Trek series has these bottle episodes. Next Generation had an episode called Conundrum, which is a classic amnesia episode. I'm sure you guys have seen, you know, amnesia episodes where everyone forgets who they are. The twist here is that they forget that they are working for a peaceful organization and they think that they're a battleship and they're supposed to go and destroy someone else. I think this one is pretty good. It plays to a lot of Next Generation strengths. You know, Picard is kind of like in full internal conflict mode of like, should I kill these people when I don't know for sure that my commands are moral and correct? Oh my god. So, you know, I think this one's pretty good, but like a lot of like the conflict of like we don't know who we are is sort of dealt with in like the first 15 minutes.
Sure. Well, so is there a lot of interpersonal conflict, or would you say it's more
very, very little. Very, very little. And I think that's kind of a Star Trek thing. Is like they don't do the interpersonal thing too much.
Okay, interesting.
Unless you're talking about like the J.J. Abrams Star Treks, you know, like they prefer like internal moral dilemmas.
All right. So everyone's sort of dealing with their own moral dilemma in this one.
Yeah.
All right.
It's except for what's his name? Commander Riker, is that the first mate? His internal struggle is he sleeps with somebody when he forgets that he was dating somebody else, and everyone's just kind of cool with it because it's like, well, you had your memory wiped. I guess you could have fucked anybody. It's not a great conflict.
All right.
It's not very interesting to
Just
watch.
a little shout. I would love to actually get some feedback from Star Trek fans. I know this is probably asking for like our own crucifixion, but like
Yeah, we've immediately excluded all Star Trek fans. I like Star Trek. I love Star Trek even, but it has some things about it that maybe
I think you're
maybe
just
we
digging
should
yourself a
question.
hole. I'm just gonna say, I, as someone who has not watched a lot of Star Trek, but is willing to, are there like favorite bottle episodes of yours that you think we missed? That like, I mean, I'm sure, but like, again, I'd love to hear some feedback from people about what they're feeling.
Let us know.
Okay, so I think this reads really naturally into 2 Twilight Zone episodes.
Yes. Some more Kirk-style acting from William Shatner in
Yeah. Well, and I think also because the bottle episode itself really, it's all about the internal conflict. It's not about characters bouncing off each other necessarily. It's about people being
and also the reasons why these episodes exist is sort of the same between Star Trek and Twilight Zone, because you have these really big budget episodes where they buy all these costumes and they, create elaborate sets, and then you have to balance that out by setting something just in one specific location with just one actor at the focus.
Right. So we watched a couple of them. We watched, they're both from season 5 of The Twilight Zone. We watched episode 3 and episode 5.
Mm-hmm.
Episode 3 is Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which is There's a Man on the Wing, the classic.
There's a man on the wing. It's a gremlin. It's like people make fun of that episode all the time, but I honestly think it's one of the best Twilight Zone episodes, and easily the best depiction on film of the fear of flying and that phobia.
I don't think I have a lot to say about it as a bottle episode necessarily. Just because it's pretty standard. It's all on the plane. There's like the set of the wing right outside the plane where the monster is, and that's about it.
I would say as a bottle episode, I think it's interesting because it ties into the theme of claustrophobia and fear of being stuck in one particular place.
Sure.
When you're on a plane,
Yeah.
You're trapped in a very enclosed space, and they can't do anything to let you out. It's another external way of trapping you because you're on a plane.
Exactly. You have to be there for whatever amount of time you have to be there.
Yeah. They can't throw you out.
But I do want to say this one thing. At the end, they're kind of like, but then they discovered that the monster was real. And I'm kind of like,
right.
wait,
but it's still metaphorical, and it's real. It's a hallucination,
like,
and
what?
it's not. Because that's what Twilight Zone does, Hannah. That is the purpose of this show.
All right, fair enough.
It's to mind fuck you. You just gotta take it.
Okay, all right. I surrender to the Twilight Zone. Then the another one we watched was the season 5, episode 5, Last Night of a Jockey, starring Andy Rooney.
No,
Mickey Rooney. Oh my God, not Andy Rooney. Jeez.
Mickey Rooney,
Different.
famous for his yellow face in Breakfast at Tiffany's, and
has a good old-fashioned breakdown in this one.
Yeah, it's really good and really old-fashioned.
Yeah, this one I think was probably my favorite of the bottle episodes that fall into the internal dilemma, sort of.
Okay.
Because
yeah, I'll
I think
support
technically he's having an argument with like another.
So just to go over like the plot of this episode.
Yeah.
Mickey Rooney is a jockey who is down on his luck. He lost some bets that he made and broke the rules, and he cheated. And so he's been thrown out by the horse racing club society. And now he's just in this room, like, trying to figure out what to do. And he's
broke, but he's still dreaming of glory and wants to get back in the race, but can't.
And he has this, like, schizophrenic argument with his own reflection, which is portrayed in voiceover.
It's never really clear if it's him that he's having the argument with, or if it's like some sort of god-like figure, devil, something like that. But I think it's fine to leave it ambiguous.
He says that he's like the alter ego, like the being the reflection says that he represents the alter ego. He's a psychological phenomenon, and he grants Mickey Rooney's wish to be
okay,
taller.
so it's a classic like genie move where he's like, I'll grant you a wish, and Mickey Rooney is like, I want to be big, meaning I want to be the biggest person in my field, like the guy on top. But he just said big, so then he just made him really tall. And at first he was really...
But he's really happy.
He was so excited.
He's not like, I didn't mean big literally. He was like, no, I kind of did mean big literally. I have had this like Napoleon complex my whole life.
Right.
And I am pretty happy to be taller than I used to be.
Right. But then he realizes, he gets a call that like, oh, he can go back to horse racing, and like they're giving him a second chance. But then he
you can't race. You're huge.
And then he has a breakdown.
I've taken it too far.
And cries. So like
I can't fit out the door.
It's like I'd say it's a pretty pat ending. Like the ironic twist.
But it's the build up that's really good.
I think for me, there's sort of two different main types of bottle episode. And so far, we've mostly been talking about the one where some sort of external pressure is put on these characters in some sort of single location that requires them to look inward and really evaluate themselves. But it's not other people putting this pressure on them. It's sort of the events. So one is more internal. And then I think the other kind of bottle episode is one where it's about other people putting pressure on each other.
Sure. Okay. I see what you're saying. So it's about, it's about the interpersonal aggression that you experience in a tight enclosed space versus the solo kind of isolation that creates internal struggle. And those are the two different things. And I think those are both pretty clearly based on like psychological phenomenon. These are things that are mythic to us because they are a shared human experience. When we're alone, we do question ourselves, and we do, have these kind of like hallucinatory, arguments with ourselves. And when we're trapped in close spaces with other people, we tend to get antsy. We tend to get a little aggressive. We get that fight or flight response in our amygdala. That's the part of the brain that has impulsive...
Welcome to Science Corner with David Frank about the claustrophobic effects.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no scientist, but it's just part of what we all see as like the mythic idea of an enclosed space. What does that represent for a human being? And I think that's what you're getting at.
And I think, exactly. And I think some situations lend themselves, and some writers tend towards writing stories where this feeling of being trapped or whatever happens forces people to look inward. And I think there are other ones where it forces them to look outward. And then through looking outward, we're shown things about their inward psyche. And I think it's just two different ways of approaching it.
I mean, I think Rod Serling definitely trends towards the internal, for sure.
Right.
I mean, that's his favorite space, is the sort of liminal spaces between conscious and unconscious, surface level and dreams, and putting that in microcosm is his favorite thing to do, and I love it too.
That's interesting that you say that, because I think I tend to prefer the episodes where there's
between people.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love those too. I'm just saying, like, for Twilight Zone, I think it works very well to have just one-on-one, just a man
in a room.
Yeah.
And I think that can produce some really great stuff. To sort of talk about another episode that's almost just a man and a camera, or it certainly feels that way, I would say, is the Breaking Bad episode from season 3. It's episode 10, Fly.
Yes.
This is a beautiful episode. So a little bit backstory. I watched Breaking Bad. I wasn't the biggest fan. I got pretty far. Like, I watched a lot of it. Like, but I think going back and watching this episode was actually really nice.
Because it kind of isolates the idea that this show is not portraying Walter White as an ideal. If anything, they're kind of portraying Jesse as like the character for the audience to root for. But like the point is that this episode is a microcosm of the conflicts of the entire show. So if you like the entire show, you're definitely going to like this episode. And if you don't like the entire show, you might still like this episode because it's kind of just a boiling down of everything.
Two things that this is just really great like TV filmmaking that's going on, I think, in this episode. And I really want to call out the sound design, which I think gets overlooked often in TV shows and.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's super important. It's super important when you have to feel like you're really there, and the way that we feel like we're in a space is through sound.
Yeah. Sound is very important. But just there were so many moments throughout this episode where I really felt like a lot of character was being portrayed, not just through the wonderful performances that Bryan Cranston and Aaron Paul are giving. Yeah, like the filmmaking.
But it's the filmmaking, it's the production and the sound design and the camera movements especially. I mean, you'll just like, this is like a Vince Gilligan staple, but like, you'll just have like a very close up on, like a piece of glass that shattered, or, showing the camera from the fly's perspective, like. This is the kind of stuff that people praise him for.
I forget the name of the woman who directed the episode, but apparently she's very much known for making very cinematic TV episodes, which I think was a great call.
Absolutely. And I think you'll see that a lot in these, because when you have very little going on in terms of like different sets, you need better camera movements. You need more dynamic filming style. You need to compensate for it, and so you get more cinematic directors, and we'll get to some others later.
Right. So this sort of comes at least one of the first big like bottoms for Walt, where like things have just been going bad. He feels horrible. Like it was supposed to be different than this, and he's just not in a good place. And so basically, he's in the lab. This fly starts bugging him, and he's like, I can't cook any more meth until we get rid of this fly.
Right, and the fly represents everything that you want it to represent.
Right, he feels disrespected by this fly. He also feels that this fly is his goal, which is just out of reach always.
The conflict that's presented at the beginning and end of the episode that kind of bookends this fly trouble is that Jesse has been skimming meth off of the top, about a quarter pound for each batch, to sell on his own, and Walt doesn't know whether to confront him or not about this.
But one thing I also want to say is this is clearly a bottle episode. He and Jesse basically are locked in this one room for most of the episode.
It might be the purest bottle episode on this list.
If not the purest, like one. They make the purest shit. Sorry. It's a very pure episode. But at the same time, I would say they clearly spent some money on this episode. Like, they made a CGI fly. Like,
right, well, but, like, how expensive is it really to make a CGI fly? I mean, this is, like, Word of God, which is a thing that TV Tropes refers to as, like, when a creator says something specific about their work. This is one where Vince Gilligan was saying, like, we just built this brand new set that we were going to use repeatedly of this new base of operations for Walt and Jesse, and they had like no budget, and so they had to make an episode that had like no other actors and that didn't have a lot of shooting locations. So that was this episode. Like, it's definitely bottle in terms of budget as well.
Okay, sure.
But like Breaking Bad has a bigger budget than most television. So it's, like the ones that are going to be topping the lists of best bottle episodes, sure, they're going to be for shows that have bigger base budgets than any high budget episode of like Roseanne or whatever. I don't know why I picked Roseanne.
Well, so this one is a complicated one for me, and I can't decide whether or not it falls into the internal side or the external character side of bottle episodes.
I would say I would have a much more definite answer for you though, because even though there is some conflict between Jesse and Walt in this episode, I would say it's mostly internal, and you can see that in the thematics because the enemy of the fly is so representative of internal struggle rather than
right.
external.
I think I would agree with that. And like the big question that seems to be being asked throughout this episode is, why am I doing this? Like, why?
It seems so futile. I'm only hurting myself and people I love. Why do I keep going?
And there's almost like a half confession from Walt at this point, who in a previous season had murdered Jesse's girlfriend. Which, like, yeah, that's for, I think, a lot of people the point where Walt became pretty irredeemable.
Right, and so it's almost like a self-commentary by the writer saying, like, well, was there really any point where he could have gotten out, And, like, the conclusion is sort of like, yes and no. He could have gotten out at a million different places, but he wouldn't have accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. He wouldn't have made the money that he wanted for his family. He wouldn't have, become a drug kingpin, which is what he wanted to do, pretty much.
Yeah, so he has this really beautiful moment where he's sort of saying, I'm so sorry about Jane, which is Jesse's girlfriend's name, to Jesse, and Jesse doesn't understand that he's basically apologizing for killing her.
I think he recognizes it on some level. I mean, this is like...
I really don't think he does.
It's approaching the climax of Jesse really not trusting Walt at all and not telling him things. So I think he doesn't know that he killed her, but
it really seems like a really beautiful moment between them, but it's made all the more tragic by the fact that Walt can't confess that last thing. But we get this sort of, like, I really felt like the whole hero's journey on this, like, this is a beautifully plotted, like, Campbell-esque, like, story circle episode. Like, you can see, like, the meeting with, like, the call to action, the meeting with the goddess, the return, like, and then at the end it really does. I love that basically the episode begins and ends on the same scene, with Walt lying in bed, unable to sleep, staring up at the blinking fire
sleep deprivation
detector.
is also a common theme that you'll see in a lot of these. So there's a contamination, like you said. This is the fly. He refers to it specifically as a contamination, so people can't leave because they don't want to let in more flies, not because there's a disease or anything. But there's a contamination. There's hallucination because it's implied several times that Walt is only you're not sure whether or not it's a real physical fly that they're dealing with, or whether it's kind of this immortal fly that feeds on inner turmoil. But so you have hallucination, you have contamination, you have a bunch of other things that are really common to these types of stories. I'm sorry, I got kind of lost in that one.
That's okay. I think another episode also that really takes two of its lead characters and then just puts them together in a really beautiful way is the Mad Men season 4 episode 7 episode called The Suitcase.
And this is pretty widely considered to be one of the best episodes of Mad Men, overall.
Yes.
And that's, I think, what's really interesting about looking at some of these bottle episodes is that you would expect a lower budget to mean, potentially mean
worse
lower value to the episode entirely, but it's just not the case. It's the restrictions that the writer puts on themselves are what lead to the quality of the writing.
Right, you have to work a little bit harder for it. You can't just have something explode. You really have to create a story with emotional payoff, and I think we definitely get this here. where basically Peggy is forced to stay late on her birthday to work on an ad with Don that he did not like.
On her birthday. I mean, come on.
To be fair,
this is the saddest episode of Mad Men.
It's sad, but it's also beautiful, and
it's not nearly the saddest episode of Mad Men.
But so Peggy, meanwhile, her boyfriend she keeps calling out to her boyfriend being like, "Oh, I'm coming to dinner, I'll be there," but then ends up staying later and he's getting more frustrated. She thinks she's just going on a romantic dinner with him, but he's actually done a surprise party and invited her whole family. But also, she doesn't really like her family, so she wasn't that thrilled that he had done that anyway.
You know what? I'm hearing this, and like this sounds much less interesting than it is. I promise. Like it's not just like phone calls and like boyfriend troubles.
Yeah,
it's about
but it is though
But it's about the intimacy between Don and Peggy, really. Like, the external things are distractions.
Exactly. And so I think on Don's side, he just found out that one of his oldest, truest friends, the woman who's
the only
dead,
person who knows his true identity.
Have you watched Mad Men? Sorry. That woman has been sick with cancer, and he's pretty sure that she's about to pass away, and he doesn't want to confront that, but also needs to, but refuses to, and so his way of dealing with that is forcing Peggy to, like, work late with him, basically.
On this suitcase. How do you market a suitcase?
Well, and then also, it's a set against the background of the Muhammad Ali fight when he was still Cassius Clay. And
classic 60s set piece. They love their set pieces in Mad Men. They
do. We're in a time period. Sorry. I keep doing these voices.
I love the voices. We keep doing the voices.
I'll do the voices. So there's that going on in the background, and also previously in the season, Don had sort of taken credit, or Peggy felt that Don had taken credit for an idea that was hers, so there's some hurt feelings between the two of them going on, and even though Peggy's in a position of power now at this point, she still feels like very disrespected.
Well, I mean, she's still absolutely a subordinate, you know? Like this is, the creator of Mad Men has said that, like, this is supposed to be kind of a representation of what it's like to be in a TV writer's room. So, you know, aspiring writers out there, you know, Mad Men, it's not like a 100% like accurate representation, but it's a representation of the emotions that run through a writer's room, the feelings of, like, you have to provide credit for an idea, or, you know, someone changes your idea and you feel like a personal hurt from it, but you're really just trying to create this work of art, and that's the most important thing. And there's a lot of natural conflict in that.
So this one I think is maybe the first one. So both of them are dealing with a lot of internal crap. But I would say that also all that external stuff that's bouncing on them and being stuck together really causes the two of them to, like, bounce off each other. And, like, we literally see it in the blocking staging of the episode, is that they'll come together and then they'll fly apart. Like, Peggy will storm out or have to go do something, and then she'll come back, and then she'll go out, and then he'll come back, and then they go out to eat food really quickly, and then they come back, and, like, it's a very bouncy, like, episode.
Yeah, I mean, it very much, when the parts where she leaves the room, they feel very much like asides on, like, a stage, you know? You would see a character walk through a threshold and pick up a phone, but you'd probably, in like a play, you would still see Don, like, in his office, like, looking at the papers or whatever, because they're short enough that, like, it just feels like it's part of the same scene almost. It feels like one contiguous play.
And I think also there's a lot of things that get brought up about the history that these two characters have with each other. The whole thing with Don stealing her idea and him giving her, but also being the one to sort of give her break into the industry. But then also he knows her. He honestly knows her the most intimately, potentially.
The most intimately out of anybody in the office, and everyone else just kind of sees her as like the one girl who, you know, is being allowed to write.
Well, he also knows her biggest secret, which is that back in season 1, she got pregnant, and he actually knows who the father is, and knows all that, and not even Peggy's, like, mother knows that information. Like, it's just Dawn who knows.
Whew. Lots of conflict
Drama.
and social conventions being broken.
And I think it was interesting because the episodes seemed to keep making Peggy make these choices where she had to keep choosing between men.
Hannah, I think we have to stop because I think you have to explain. Are you in trouble with the police? I can hear this.
Oh,
sirens.
you can? No, it's just outside.
New York, the city of madmen. Sorry, what were you saying?
Okay, there is a terrorist here today.
I just wanted to acknowledge the sirens so that the audience isn't going like, "Did they hear it? Like, is something wrong?"
Sorry.
Um.
Ugh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry
just
that it's
what were you
picking them up
saying?
so bad. But yeah, I think this episode also keeps making Peggy like make these choices between men, and Don is always the man who seems to win. But it's clearly not like in a sexual way, because in the same way that he knows her so deeply, like he feels that he can be vulnerable with her, because when he finds out that his friend did die, Peggy is there, and like he lets her comfort him, but like not in a like, now take me, like comfort me sort of way, just in a like,
Yeah, I mean, the way that it's visually represented is that he sort of rests his head on her lap, and she's just kind of like smoking or you know just sitting there, and it feels very like maternal. And then, you know, when Don is talking to Peggy, it's paternal, so it's like they're mother and father to each other, and also co-workers, and also like an old married couple, and also, you know, just friends. You know, it's very complicated, their relationship.
So really quick, I want to talk about Doctor Who, because we watched a couple of episodes from this. One episode from season 1 of the just New Who. We didn't go classic or anything. Talk about budgetary issues.
Which, I mean, yeah, they had those same kind of things there, because, like, this definitely falls into the category. This definitely falls into that category of budget is the big reason why these episodes are made. They gotta reuse costumes, they gotta reuse sets. They don't have the money to just be throwing it around on time travel all the time.
Right. Can you talk at all about the budgetary restrictions that were going on for Boomtown?
Well, I mean, like, season 1, they were just experimenting with bringing this show back. I should say series 1, because that's the Brit way.
It's
but,
season
like,
in America.
they had built these really expensive Slitheen costumes for, and had the CGI for it, for a huge two-parter, which was, like, the big two-parter of the season, which I call the farting alien two-parter. Because Russell T is a campy motherfucker. He loves his camp, and so he made a third episode, which comes right before the big finale, the big 2-part finale with the Daleks. He makes an episode called Boomtown, which reuses the costumes from the Farting Aliens episodes, and takes place entirely in Cardiff, which is where they mainly shoot Earth scenes anyway. So they didn't have to build new sets. Yeah, they didn't have to do, you know, any of that stuff. They shot on location for a couple of things, but like comparatively to other Doctor Who episodes, this is cheap. And they're not trapped at all, but they are kind of in parts enclosed in social situations. So the Doctor is trapped in a restaurant and with the alien, and then he traps the alien in the TARDIS with them, and they have like kind of a back and forth. So there is some kind of bottling of these characters, but it's not as claustrophobic as a lot of other ones.
For sure. There's definitely a lot of, like, running around Cardiff. But I would say that this one felt not so bodily to me, except in that it was very much about, and I think this is one of the strengths of Doctor Who is, or can be one of the strengths, is that it really was forcing characters to confront stuff about themselves and the way they treat other people.
Okay,
And
you can see it that way.
That's
I just
how
see
I
it as
felt.
like lazy manufactured drama where Mickey shows up and is like, I'm dating somebody else.
Right.
Oh no, love triangles that don't matter because Rose does not care about Mickey at all and never has.
Yeah. I don't know. But, like, it is characters bouncing off each other. Even if it's not the most elegant,
For sure.
it certainly is that.
I think for people who like this episode, I think kind of the thing that they would tend to like is there's a part of the episode where, you know, the Doctor is talking to this homicidal alien, and the alien's like, you know, oh, I spared this one girl's life because she was pregnant and really nice to me. And the Doctor's like, every psychotic killer does that. And she's like, oh, are you a psychotic killer? And he's like...
Spoken like a
and
killer.
He's like, kinda, yeah. But then he does spare the life of this homicidal criminal maniac.
They do sort of give him an out. Because he didn't know exactly what to do, but I think he was ready to turn her over and kind of let her die.
I think there were plenty of outs. Like, you could have come up with numerous solutions for this problem. You could drop her on a planet that's, like, so primitive that she can't cause any problems.
Right, or uninhabited, or whatever.
Yeah, you could do any number of things, you know, or you could kill her. Like, I don't care. Like, the Doctor does kill people all the time.
Right, but I do like that it's usually at least a little bit of a moral dilemma when he's gonna kill someone.
Yeah.
Which I think is good.
It definitely is. You're absolutely right. But, like, I think that this episode, it's definitely not my favorite of Season 1, and Season 1 is definitely not my favorite of Doctor Who, but...
That is fair. Let's go talk about something that is one of my favorites. Yeah. Season 4, Episode 10, Midnight. As you put it, the only good Russell T. Davies
Which is an
episode.
Exaggeration. But, I mean, Russell T. Davies, I've got a lot of problems with him as a writer. Okay. We'll get to those.
So I love this episode. I was so excited to go back and watch this one. And I think this is like a classic, like, train murder mystery almost. Yeah. But there isn't murder so much in the beginning.
Right.
It's just like... These characters are on this 4-hour-long car ride to see a beautiful place, and they're all on vacation, and I love the scenes of them getting to know each other, and the Doctor just talking to everyone, and clearly just having a great time. And then things go awry when a mysterious creature, like, nothing's supposed to be alive, like, outside on this planet.
It's a paradoxically vulnerable, but also incredibly powerful creature that possesses people to steal their voice.
Well, we don't actually even know what it really does because it's brand new, but...
It definitely steals people's voices, though.
Yeah, like, it definitely controls people in some way.
But in a very Twilight Zone-y kind of thing, you're not entirely sure at any point what this being is capable of, what it wants, or what's going on.
So... It very much turns into they're in this locked room with this mysterious creature, and they sort of have to figure out what to do. And it is all about just people bumping off of each other. And this is where I think we really start to see those bottle episodes, which I think I tend to like more, where it's less about people dealing with the sad things inside them and more about them like having to deal with other people while they're sad. And I think it comes, there's an entire West Wing episode called No Exit based off of the play, where it's the
1944 play by Jean-Paul Sartre.
Yes.
Sartre.
Love me some Sartre. Yeah.
Sartre.
I do. I love me some Sartre. But anyway.
No Exit.
In No Exit, basically the main thesis of that is hell is other people. And
right.
I think...
It's about people being trapped in a literal hell that is just like a room.
Three dudes. It's
three
sort of
people.
The Good Place.
Right. It
better.
is The Good Place, isn't it?
It is. It for sure is The Good Place, which we can talk about later. But, yeah, so this is very much, it's these characters, like, one has it's about mob mentality. It's about bouncing
authority.
From one idea to the next, and about learning and blah, blah, blah. I did think it was really interesting that the black women in this episode are the voices of reason / the heroes.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like, it's definitely about confronting those, classic power structures that we see. The main, like, person who's, like, willing to throw the doctor off of the ship and kill him is, like, this professor who's, like, really mean to his female black subordinate, and, like, doesn't believe in her, opinions at all. So it's definitely about confronting those kind of things.
Oh, for sure. And I think this episode, and there are a couple others that do a really good job of building that fever pitch where, like, things just slowly start to escalate and the tension starts to ramp up, and then we hit that climax and, like, everything explodes, like it really hits it hard, and then we come back down from it, and it's like, where did we all go? Like, what was this crazy adventure that we just went on? This was so insane. And I really love the line at the end of this episode where the hostess of the...
Yeah, she dies and the doctor says, what was her name? And they never say it explicitly. Yeah. You just think of her as like a background character. She's a hostess. She's a stewardess.
Right. And you're, I think, explicitly told or hear, like, everyone else's name, too. And it was really interesting. He was like, what was her name?
Right. Because that's something that the doctor does a lot is, like, remembering the little people.
For sure.
Because he's like a space god.
God, I love space god.
And Russell T. and Moffat both love that about him.
Also, even though Donna is only in this episode for like 10 seconds,
she's beautiful.
I just love her rapport with the doctor so much. All right. We'll move on though.
Yes. I think, like, it would be good to talk about how, we've mostly been talking about dramas. Comedies.
Yes, let's talk about some comedies.
Sure. All right, let's get a little lighthearted here.
The classic, everyone gets snowed in.
Yeah.
Everyone has to get people get locked in a closet together, blah, blah, blah. I think there's a Happy Days episode that might have been one of the earliest, like, sitcoms to do this, where... that's not true. I bet there's an I Love Lucy episode somewhere.
It's as old as TV itself, for sure.
For sure. It's a play. That's the other thing is, like, it's basically based off of playwriting where you can't have these insanely elaborate sets because you're forced to stay on this one stage with a limited amount of space, and
it's all dialogue.
Yeah, and you're limited by how fast you can change the sets. Like, it's all dialogue and character. So I think, but yeah, there's an episode of Happy Days where they all get locked in a, like, closet, like a freezer or something.
Ooh, no, we're all trapped.
The ones we're going to talk about are a little bit more recent than that.
Yeah, so, like, Seinfeld, let's talk Seinfeld. This was, like, the episode that really cemented in a lot of people's minds. What is Seinfeld? It's a show about nothing. It's a show about nothing. And it's the Chinese restaurant.
How did you like this episode?
I love the Chinese restaurant. Are you kidding? Do you not enjoy this one?
I did not enjoy this one.
Come on. It's the scene where Elaine, like, walks over and
that's amazing. Here's the thing.
Food off of other people's plates.
This to me, it felt like watching or like looking at a cave painting a little bit. Where it was like...
It's not what Seinfeld became, which
right.
It became a show about nothing that was truly incredible in its focusing on the mundane, but...
Well, no, and I think this was for sure that. It's even less about, I think, what Seinfeld becomes, but what, like, this type of episode becomes. Like, it's very slow, and, like, it feels very piecemeal. And this is for sure one where I think everyone's dealing with their own thing, and it's not so much about them, like, pissing each other off. Like, other people are pissing them off. But it's, like, all external stuff that, like, they're dealing with their own internal reaction to it.
All right, I see what you're saying.
It's not like Jerry makes, like, someone mad, and then...
I can see that, but I love the anxiety of, like, I'm waiting for this phone call. I gotta get this phone call. And then they call for Cartwright instead of Costanza.
The timing was just off for me. I know.
Like this kind of stuff, it feels very relatable, and you know, just having to wait a long time for food and having to, we got to get to this movie. It's Plan 9 from outer space. It's the worst movie ever made. George.
Like, I think there were really great moments in it, but I think as a whole, I found the timing to be off. Like, it wasn't as...
I'll buy that.
Like, I just don't think the, like, acting was there. And to be fair, it's season 2 of a show that ran for so long. Like, that's fine. And it's, like, still somewhat the early days of the modern sitcom.
I think you're right that it probably got a little bit better, or, you know, at least, you know, it felt a little different when they did it the next season, The Parking Garage.
I think the biggest sitcom for me that felt like a stage play, though, was the Frasier episode. This is actually the season finale, I believe.
Of season 1, yeah. Season 1, episode 24, My Coffee with Niles. It's an obvious reference to My Dinner with Andre.
Yeah.
Which is a movie about a conversation.
And it was very much just a conversation. And this one also sort of reminded me a little bit about the Breaking Bad episode, because I think the central question in that one is, why am I doing this? In this one, Niles is asking the central question of Frasier, like, are you happy? And I think they do some really good, like, nothing like insanely like mind-blowing writing, but just like really strong writing.
Yeah. I mean, people like Frasier because it is like a play, like a I don't know, you know, that kind of early 20th century expressionist playwriting where you would just kind of have two characters and they just talk, and you really get to, like, who are these people?
Right.
And I think that's why people like Frasier in general. Like, I think you'll see with a lot of these episodes that they just really play to the strengths of the shows that they are in. Like, you know, every episode of Seinfeld is about, you know, mundane things, but it's really funny when you just stick it in one place. Every episode of Breaking Bad is about, you know, should I keep going? Should I keep doing this? But when you stick it in one place, you really get to see it all boiled down.
Yeah.
And I think that's something you see with Frasier.
Absolutely. Well. There's I just love the question, are you happy? He keeps being interrupted by other people coming into the scene, his friends, his father, etc. The coffee coming, and he keeps sending the coffee back. And then it finally comes at the end, and his response to getting the coffee back is his answer to the "Are you happy?" question.
Are you satisfied? You know what? Yes.
Yeah, and
then he drinks the coffee, and it's disgusting.
Right.
It undercuts itself. It's a comedy.
It's just like it does. But I love that, and I think it's just really some really good writing.
And then for some it doesn't blow me away with how funny it is. Friends also did a bottle episode that we should just reference since we spent so much time talking about Friends before. The one where no one is ready.
Yes.
It's all in Monica's apartment, and it's all...
Honestly, all right.
Okay.
I will say this. I sympathized with Ross for a really long time in this.
For longer than you did in any other episode of that show.
Who has a sister who takes forever to get ready. I can sympathize with being like, hey, just like you can mess around and do whatever, but can you at least just like be dressed while you're doing it? You know, like, and like, especially it's a big important like event for him. Like, it wasn't something like actually that trivial. It was something kind of important. So like I felt for him. I felt for Ross.
I sympathize, but he is a little bit of a nag.
Oh, and then also the point at which he yells at Rachel, I immediately am like, oh, oh, okay. You are an asshole. All right.
Very much so.
Yeah. So in this one, I think is almost a 50-50 split. No, this one's definitely just clashing personalities. Like it's all hell is other people.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
There's nothing internal. And I think you'll find that that's pretty common for comedies because you need a lot of conflict for comedy. It doesn't really work to be very introspective in a comedy. And you know, I think that sort of goes into that conflict. I think that ties in pretty well to where a lot of people were first introduced to the concept of a bottle episode, which was in Community, in the episode of Season 2, Episode 8, Cooperative Calligraphy, which is what happens there.
And I will say this, I don't know if it's just because of how familiar we are with Community or what, but Season 2 of Community is just absolutely packed with bottle episodes.
Yeah, and I think it's because, you know, that show was still finding its footing. It had a limited budget, but Dan Harmon is a crazy person and decided to do a huge 2-part paintball episode and, you know, other just big budget episodes for, like, virtually no reason. An animated episode in Season 2, right? Like, that was the one where Abed's Uncontrollable Christmas happens.
Yeah, there was... Dang. But also at the same time, like, he spent so much of his own money on the show. Like, that's how much budget crisis they were in. But also a huge commitment to, like, making a good product and making, like, really good TV. In Cooperative Calligraphy, one of the characters, Abed, who is a TV fanatic himself, very trope savvy. He's constantly throughout the show pointing out a whole bunch of like meta stuff that's happening, but usually to humorous effect.
Yeah, so he states that they're doing a bottle episode because they are trapped in the study room by themselves. You know, no one else is trapping them.
My favorite part. That's my favorite part of Cooperative Calligraphy, and I think is what makes it, if not my favorite, definitely in the top, like, 3 episodes.
Yeah, I think it's my favorite as well. It really does have all the strengths of a good bottle episode and all the strengths of a good Community episode.
Yes, exactly.
It's really fantastic.
It just, there's nothing actually trapping them in this room but each other.
Right. The plot is just that Annie has lost several pens.
And this is the final straw / pen. And she snaps. So both of us have watched this with commentary, and at one point, Dan Harmon on the commentary track says, I love the idea that what kept these people in the room, which is love for one another, and that, all right, we love Annie, so we'll help her find her pen, and like we also want to prove ourselves innocent that no, we didn't take her pen.
Right, and then it devolves into hate, but then you return to...
Right, it returns to this place of, listen, like, if we all love each other this much, at a certain point, we just have to accept that, like, this pen is gone. And they end up deciding that what happened was a ghost took it, because they just needed to believe something to let each other. It wasn't even to let themselves off the hook. It was to let each other off the hook, because they didn't want to hate each other.
Be angry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To me, this is like the perfect hell is other people, but like with a happy, beautiful twist at the end where it's like...
Hell is other people and heaven is other people.
Exactly. It's like, we can't escape both. This is why we live in the world in which we live.
I think it's important to talk about the camera work in this episode in particular because directed by Joe Russo, who you may know better for Captain America Civil War and Captain America...
Among other things.
You know, multiple Captain America movies, big action set pieces, but where they got, you know, some of their start is on, you know, low budget, one set drama, or comedies that are just about talking. And I think that's really indicative of what is required for a truly great bottle episode.
Right, and I think Joe Russo also is on the commentary track for this episode, and he mentions that as the episode progressed, they moved from Steadicam to handheld, sort of a more shaky cam, operation to sort of increase that sense of like tension and frustrated action that was going on. Yeah, like it gave it a really interesting energy. And like this is all just it's beautiful watching these characters bounce from one thing to another that's all against each other, and things are exposed and then things are hurt.
And all of the dialogue is true to the characters and what they value.
And it's so funny.
Britta is still totally about privacy and human rights and fighting for all that stuff, whereas Jeff is just trying to be like a leader and like take control of the situation, and Troy just doesn't know what's going on.
Right. They plant a lot of things in this episode that come back later in the season, which is one of the strengths of Community, is that like sort of very small but steady long form storytelling that goes on in the background almost. And I'll just say this. Abed has a great quote from this episode. Where he just says, "I hate bottle episodes. They're wall-to-wall facial expressions and emotional nuance. I might as well sit in a corner with a bucket on my head." Since he is...
But he's extremely useful in the episode. He's really helpful.
He is!
So he's wrong.
But just, I love that a character like Abed would hate that in a TV episode.
He likes the Star Trek episodes where people are blowing shit up. He doesn't like the ones where they
where they're just on the bridge
and fight with swords.
Yeah. So... just really quickly, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. I'd say that there are 4 other episodes in season 2 alone.
All right, let's run through them.
All right, there's epidemiology, which is...
epidemiology.
Epidemiology, sorry.
Right.
All right, do it. Call me out. This is the zombie Halloween episode that takes place entirely in the library. It also, everyone gets amnesia at the end because... they need to.
And there's a contamination.
There's a contamination. Exactly. So they are quarantined because of a contamination, which is classic. This one is, there's not even so much like, there is a moment of sort of the group all being combative with one another. But for the most part, it's just dealing with zombies. Then there's the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons episode, which is episode 14.
Also directed by Joe Russo.
Yes, where a character who is nicknamed Fat Neil by Jeff is invited to play Dungeons and Dragons because Jeff is scared that this kid is going to kill himself. And so then they all play Dungeons and Dragons to try to make him feel like part of a community.
Right. And not to dwell on this one too much, but I think it is important to talk about the sound design. Again, hugely important with this one because they have a lot of non-diegetic sound that is supposed to represent the sound in the game world. So arrows zinging and stuff like that. And I think, camera work, sound, both very important when all you have is dialogue. You don't have any of the visual production design.
This one sort of sets up Chevy Chase's character, Pierce, who is an older member of the group, really sort of starts to solidify his descent into villain for the rest of the season. He is very antagonistic towards Neil, and actually becomes the villain in the game. So it's really nice the way that they use Dungeons and Dragons as this backdrop for, and they don't do the thing where they break away and the characters are all in costume or anything. It is just them sitting at a table playing Dungeons and Dragons, which is amazing.
And then the last one that's a bottle episode is called Applied Anthropology and Culinary Arts. It's the one where Shirley gives birth, and it takes place 100% in the anthropology room.
And this one's pretty classic. Initially anthropology is such a blow-off class, but then the dean brings a reporter in to show off how great their college is. So they feel trapped by that at first, because they can't leave this room because they're supposed to be taking a final. But then Shirley goes into labor. She's bound to have a kid. And so that's supposed to be a way to get them out. But then she can't leave because the ambulance can't get in because there's a food. It's supposed to be a food around the world. So that happens.
So then that's all of the ones for season 2. But then there are a few other ones that pop up elsewhere. There's one, Critical Film Studies, which is It's not necessarily exactly
Also
a bottle
season
episode.
2.
Oh, right, that's also season 2. But it's not necessarily a bottle episode because it's 2 sets that might have been pretty expensive. It's interesting because
again, it's mostly about conversations and character conflict.
it's a My Dinner with Andre episode, but it's My Dinner with Abed, and that's kind of ties it into the Frasier episode. Lots of connections firing. But then you've also got, in season 3, you've got Remedial Chaos Theory, which is a bottle episode.
Which I think a lot of people consider this their favorite
episode.
Community episode.
Yeah.
It was actually nominated for a Hugo Award, which is like, that doesn't happen to NBC comedies. On NBC. Like, that's not a thing that happens, but then it did.
And why would it be? But it is a really good episode, and it's typically like a common fan favorite, and then Cooperative Calligraphy is Dan Harmon's favorite of that season. Like, these bottle episodes are the best Community episodes. Like,
they really are, because Community's strongest point is always its writing, and always its characters, and always the funny things that they say to each other, and like the heartfelt and like honest way that they interact.
Absolutely.
Because even when they're going on crazy animated adventures that don't actually make any sense, they like make sense on an emotional level.
Yeah.
If that
on an interpersonal level, on the level that you have with your friends.
Exactly. And it's just amazing. I think we could talk for probably 3 more hours just about Community.
And then to like cap it off, in season 5, you have an episode called Cooperative Polygraphy, which mirrors Cooperative Calligraphy. And in that one, they're also trapped in a room, and there's a polygraph, so they all have to be incredibly honest with each other, and that's interpersonal conflict.
Right. Yeah, and there's a couple more episodes that we watched to prep for this that we didn't really talk about. We watched a couple of episodes of Buffy.
Yeah, I think the Buffy episode, Older and Far Away, is a pretty good example of how, like, you're dealing with a fantasy show. So normally there's a lot of effects of, like, vampires that look really crazy and have a lot of makeup or digital effects or, all this stuff.
This is pretty low on effects.
So it's just everyone... The conflict is just that everyone can't leave this house because of a magic spell.
Right. So, I do love the way that it was resolved, where the vengeance demon who trapped them all there enters the house, and then she can't leave. Until they do it. I think this one definitely falls into the, like, hell is other people category.
Right. What do you think of, like, Dawn as being totally unsympathetic and terrible for the episode? Am I alone in this?
No, I think this is not a strong Dawn episode. I don't think it's that strong of an episode, period.
Right.
Both of the Buffy episodes we watched.
Buffy loves a big budget.
Yeah, Buffy does.
Buffy doesn't need a small budget to be good. Buffy needs a big budget.
Not to say that Buffy character, like the strength of Buffy isn't necessarily its characters. Certainly they're beloved, but they're not like what the show is.
It's the conflict, it's the Joss conflict that he makes in the external that reflects internal.
Exactly. It's less about that group dynamic angst.
Right. Okay. I guess
and
that's
more of that internal angst.
Yeah. It's like, what is Buffy struggling with this week, rather than what is the gang doing with each other.
Right. And there's a couple episodes of the X-Files, the season 1, episode 8, episode Ice.
Which is just a shot-for-shot remake of John Carpenter's The Thing, literally with the same production designer
really?
John Carpenter's The Thing, yeah. So basically just recreating that set, that, the North Pole set, but, instead setting it in Nome, Alaska. But, it's the same episode.
It sort of reminded me of the Star Trek episode that we talked about.
Oh, yeah. The Naked Time, or yeah.
Yeah, the Naked Time.
Because there's an infestation, there's a quarantine.
That came from the ice.
Yep.
There's an ancient threat. Real quick, before we wrap up, talk about The West Wing, because Aaron Sorkin, the master of dialogue,
yes.
master of forcing characters together.
He likes the interpersonal that we were talking about, where it's you put 2 people in a room and you see them get angry at each other.
We watched 2 of them. I think No Exit is the clearest one where it's like I liked this one because yes, people are quarantined, but they're quarantined in different groups, and they're in groups that we don't necessarily see forced together all the time, which I liked. Josh is forced in with someone who cut his joke, so they have to deal with that. There's Toby and the other guy, what's his name? Do you remember?
Leo. Toby and Leo. He was the chief of staff, but yeah. And then, yeah, so that was one episode. The first one that Aaron Sorkin really definitely had budget issues for was 17 People, which was season 2, episode 18. And that was like, he was told you can't have any guest actors,
right.
You can't have any sets outside the White House,
right.
And you can't have, there were so many limitations, you couldn't have any special effects or anything. It was just the White House set and just the characters that you had for every episode. So that one's really a boiling down.
But he does a great job, and I think a lot of these episodes that we talked about are some of the episodes that people sometimes remember the most. And I think being able to craft a really solid half-hour to 45-minute long show, like a little play, is a really impressive feat of writing, and not something that every television writer wants to do or likes to do. But I think when they are forced to do it, you get some good results.
Absolutely. There was one other West Wing bottle episode that I watched, which was called Isaac and Ishmael, and that was a bottle episode because it had to be produced very, very quickly in response to 9/11.
And this one certainly felt the most preachy, I'll say.
Oh, of course. But I mean, Aaron Sorkin's always preachy.
Yeah, but this felt especially preachy.
But this one it's a 9/11 episode. It's gonna be preachy. I mean...
Right, come on. Basically the White House staff are each talking to this group of students who are in the White House during what they call a crash, which is just a lockdown. And I do think there's some nice plotting in that we cut away from that scene.
It's really just one scene investigating this one guy who might be a threat to the White House because he has the same name as a terrorist suspect. And, it's about racial profiling, it's about all that stuff. But then it cuts away to everyone in the cast just explaining to a bunch of teenagers what terrorism is. And they're really bad at it. I just want to run through, all of the comparisons that they made. I just want to run through, they make these weird comparisons that are really awkward today. They're just one of them says that terrorists are the KKK, that's Josh, and another one says that, and then they, are confused about whether or not terrorists hate our freedom.
Yeah.
Is it political or is it religious? They're really not sure about it.
Right.
They go on this rant about, whether the CIA should be tapping phones. And they kind of come to the conclusion that it's kind of okay if they're tapping phones to stop terrorists. And then, Toby starts talking about how the Taliban is Nazis in Poland. And I'm not really at all. It's very, very different. In that we can't just go fight a natural war with Iran and Iraq and just only kill Nazis. We can't only kill Taliban people. It's maybe I'm just getting into too rough of topic, but it just seems like they got in over their heads as well, and it's just way too quick to be quick, say something about terrorism.
Right. Well, so the message at the end was that we live in a pluralistic society, and that that's a good thing, and we should continue to live in a pluralistic society, and that means accepting conflicting ideas sometimes. And I think they do a good job of having each character sort of each present a new side to something, whether or not they do a good job of it. And that the idea is that there's not just one correct answer, and that sure, these are some of the smartest people, but they don't always have all of the answers. And yeah, I don't know. And I did think it was nice that every time they cut between the cafeteria with the students to the interrogation with the White House staffer, that every time they went back to the cafeteria, they had added another cast member. So it felt like it was this really nice way, I think, of building tension in the episode and building it all up.
I think, there were a couple things that we didn't really touch on, which are sometimes you have bottle episodes that just kind of zero in on something that's in the background. So if your show is ostensibly about medical practice or, being a surgeon, but you never really show surgery as the central point of the episode. Sometimes you'll have an episode that's just about a surgery. So you have a Grey's Anatomy episode called The Room Where It Happens in season 13, and you have MASH with an episode called OR, the operating room. So just kind of, it can be useful for a writer to use a bottle episode to kind of zero in on something that you take for granted in the other episodes.
All right, I think that wraps up everything.
Right. Do you want to sort of run through and say, what are the categories and what are the traits of a bottle episode as you see it?
I feel like I'm just repeating myself now because I think I said it a lot.
Right. But you got the introspective and the interpersonal. You've got the ones where people are trapped physically or the ones where they kind of trap themselves.
Yes. I think most bottle episodes are due to budgetary restraints, but I think some of them
are just purposeful from the writer trying to zero in on a particular relationship or a particular location on set.
Right. Or really trying to do something exciting, but it's still just having all of the characters in a room, and that's the exciting thing.
And these aren't always the best episodes of a show, but they tend to be the standouts because they're different.
Exactly. I think whether or not they're the best, I think they're almost always necessary, not just from a budgetary standpoint, but from a pacing standpoint for your show, because your audience is going to get... This is one reason I got exhausted with Breaking Bad, is because every episode it just gets worse. It's this constant high tense, high energy, stress.
You take a break and have a slow paced episode and that really makes all the other episodes stand out more in the season.
Exactly. That's really character focused and allows us to not only allows us the audience, but allows the characters to sort of take a breath and refocus. I think that's really important from a writing standpoint and as a viewer.
Right. And I think as far as some of the tropes and the mythic aspects that go along with these tropes, I've said it before a little bit, but just to really wrap it up, the intrapersonal ones where you're talking about multiple people trapped in a room, I think those work because you have this amygdala fight or flight response where you're claustrophobic, you're trapped, and you're like a caged animal and you just want to fight everybody, and so everybody yells at each other. And then for the ones that are more introspective, that's like the isolation of being on a spaceship or being a hostage. You sometimes have hallucinations in those episodes, or people just going crazy because they're just so trapped in their own mind. And so I think those are kind of the mythical human aspects of these stories that make them so common.
Sure. Thanks for sticking with us, guys. I feel like this was a long one, maybe. I had a great time.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that we had a lot of individual episodes that we went really in depth with, and I think that's good. And I encourage you all to check out these episodes for yourself and form your own opinions.
Please, again, tell us if there's any of your favorites that we missed, or if you have any further insight into bottle episodes that you really want to share with us.
Yeah, and let us know if there are any tropes or topics that you want us to cover in the future.
Yeah, you can find us on Twitter at Talking Tropes, and we will see you guys in 2 weeks.